Dr. Vasile Stanescu is an assistant professor of communication studies at Mercer University. He co-edited the Critical Animal Studies book series, co-founded the North American Association for Critical Animal Studies, and is a former co-editor of the Journal for Critical Animal Studies and former co-organizer of the Stanford Environmental Humanities Project. Dr. Stanescu has authored over 20 peer-reviewed publications on the critical study of animals and the environment, and his writings are available at the website academia.edu. And thank you so much for taking the time to be here today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. This is very exciting for me because I originally became vegetarian for the environment. So a lot of things have shifted for me personally since then, but I still hold on strongly to that. So I'm very happy to talk about the impact of animal consumption and production on the environment. But first, I'm interested in your vegan story.
So I first went vegetarian at the age of 9, and it was not for the environment whatsoever. I had checked out, and this is true, Peter Singer's Animal Liberation at the age of 9 from my public library. I read through it and was completely convinced and announced to my parents that I was vegetarian. They did not take that well. They thought this was a phase, and they tried actually, this sounds harsher than it was, but they tried to kind of convince me not to do it by not accommodating me. And so I made the sort of food that I could at the age of 9 until they decided, okay, he's very sincere about this. And then they switched over and started being helpful. So
how long did that take, that process, till they were convinced?
Took a few months.
Oh.
Yeah. So they would try to serve like extra meat, and I would be like, "Oh, I'm really vegetarian." So my first core identity of my whole life, the first thing that didn't change, regardless of who I was around, the friends or the peer pressure or anything else, was being vegetarian. My very first, this is also true, my very first political action was to get a salad bar in my middle school, which I successfully managed to do.
Wow.
Was when a middle school student went to the school board and said, "I want salad." They were more bemused and confused by anything else. And they were like, "Well, let them eat salad." So, that's why I went vegetarian. I stayed vegetarian all the way to college. And then in college, I went vegan. And it was something I had thought that I should do for a while. I didn't have, I think, enough control of my diet, and there were a lot of peer pressure, and just in college, I think we have a lot more autonomy, and I was like, okay, now it's finally time. And one clear argument that's always stayed in my mind, Carol Adams, in her book, The Sexual Politics of Meat, she makes this argument that like dairy cows and chickens are actually uniquely exploited by being female. It's their femaleness that's exploited, being chickens and milk. And something about that connected with me more than the other arguments, and I was like, well, that's particularly terrible. And so anyways, that was it. So I stopped going vegan. I've been vegan ever since.
That is amazing. That's awesome. And so you write about the 6th Great Extinction. I've mentioned that to sort of random people, and I've kind of quit doing that because they just look at me like I'm completely out of my mind. But this is real, the 6th Great Extinction. Can you explain what that is?
Yes, so right now we're going through a period of massive species extinction. Now, no one has a totally clear definition of even what is a species, and no one is totally sure how many are dying out. But the UN estimates somewhere around 150 species could be going extinct every single day. And of course, once a species goes extinct, that's it. There's no, just by Jurassic Park, there's no bringing any of these species back. One of the things I try to emphasize to people is the urgency of what we have to do, that we don't have forever to keep playing around. And this is one of the main ways that I try to get them to understand that we are passing unchangeable tipping points that cannot be fixed. And so each time a species goes extinct, that is forever. And let me underscore that there is complete agreement, including from the United Nations, the #1 driving force of species extinction is animal agriculture. It is causing more species extinction than any other element, and many of those elements are caused by animal agriculture. So climate change is in part caused by animal agriculture. So taken holistically, in terms of taking over space the animals need, directly killing them. So we have the free range, but they get attacked when they're in the pasture. And so they'll actually try to kill species around these free range animals, so-called free range animals, and the driving force of climate change. Multiple peer-reviewed studies and reports by the United Nations have all determined that the #1 cause of loss of biodiversity and cause of species extinction is animal agriculture.
And so when we think about like the burning of the Brazilian rainforest, for example, I'm guessing there are a lot of species that maybe we don't even know exist that are disappearing.
That's right. That's why it's an estimate. Like, we estimate how many species are existing. There are species who have probably gone extinct that we have never even known. You mentioned the Brazilian rainforest. A couple interesting things on that. You often hear this thing like, oh, what about soy? That's part of the problem. Well, what they don't tell you is, yes, there is some rainforest which is destroyed for soy. Almost all of the soy is then fed to livestock. What you might also have heard of is this kind of rotational grazing idea. This is what I'm just now starting to look into for the future research. And what I'm seeing is actually research done in Brazil. And what they're noticing is, hey, when we stop cutting down this rainforest as much, because we're actually intensifying, we're making it less free range, that's the benefits that they're citing to claim for the supposed benefits of rotational grazing. But it's not true. Yeah.
And so for people who maybe are climate deniers, that there is any problem with the climate, these people do exist still. But even beyond the impacts on the climate, it seems clear already from what you're saying that animal agriculture, agribusiness is impacting just the environment.
I don't know how we're ever going to reach climate change deniers. To be perfectly honest, they seem to have made a decision to just not engage with science. But I will agree with you that the effects of climate change, the effects on the environment by animal agriculture are all beyond just climate change. So we've already mentioned species loss. It is also true that there is massive loss in terms of water. Probably the #1 use of water in the United States is intensified livestock, both through the amount of water they have to use to clean all the pens and the water contamination that happens from these so-called lagoons, which of course continuously leak and go into the water supply. People get very unhappy when they see something like an oil spill. And when the oil spill happens, they'll focus on how harmful that is to the wildlife. What they routinely ignore is how there's the equivalent of constant oil spills from these lagoons of mass pollution that then spill into the water, which are far more destructive of all of those animals and that contamination of the water than any of those oil spills would be. It makes no sense to be worried about oil spills and okay with CAFOs, factory farms.
Mm-hmm. And often these CAFOs are located in areas of Black and brown people and poor, lower economically, socioeconomic areas as well. Isn't that true?
Yeah, there's so much going on there. So one of the things I feel quite passionately about is what is sometimes referred to as intersectionality, or the way I prefer the term solidarity, but the way that animal rights should work with other social justice issues. So there's no question that animal agriculture causes environmental racism. I've personally gone to multiple CAFOs and they stink from miles away. As you first start to come in, you can smell them. As you get closer, they become so suffocating. One of the interesting things is how people be like, wait, how can these animals being tortured like this and I can't see it? So I teach a class on animals all the time. I teach a class on animals most years. And many of my students, particularly if they come from more privileged backgrounds, will make this comment. How can what you're telling me be true? How can this be 60 billion land animals and I can't see it? And what I have to explain to them is that is a function of your privilege. That is a function of people not wanting to live around these terrible polluting environments. And so getting not to see what is in fact happening all around us.
And they're inside basically factory, it's factory farms. So they're inside windowless buildings, right? So we can't see them.
You're right, and they're making it far harder to see. So what they claim is biosecurity. They say, oh, we'll bring in disease. to a certain degree, that may be true. To a certain degree, it's also a bit of a pretext to stop these kind of exposés that happen where they show what happens inside the farms. And they're increasing laws to try to stigmatize whistleblowers or people who show what are happening, so-called Aggag laws. Some of these have a federal component where you can actually get felony terrorism charges by trying to disrupt animal enterprise businesses or expose what's happening. So they are in a lot of what I do as a communications professor is actually investigate these kind of rhetorical strategies that the animal agricultural industry is doing to try to win the war of ideas. And why is it that more people don't know what is going on?
Okay, cool. Well, it sounds like a great course that you're taking or that you're teaching. And for the people who are studying your course, I heard you mention that you've offered an A to any student who can defend animal agriculture.
That is true. That is true. So every single time I teach, I do two things every single time I teach this course. On day one, this is how I start the course. I say, drop this course. I say, I know what you are about to learn, and you do not want to know what I know. No one wants to know what I know. I do not want to know what I know. And once you know these things, you can never unknow them. What I'm going to tell you is real and it's true, but it will change you. And then the second thing that I do is I say, to get an A in this class, you don't have to do any other work. All you have to do is defend factory farming. And you don't have to defend it to me. Maybe I'm too biased. We'll choose at random 2 other students. And if they agree that you've adequately defended factory farming, you just automatically get an A. No student's taken me up on it yet.
Have they tried to defend it?
No. Some of the students do try to defend and believe in what's so-called humane meat. Some of the students do try to defend in vitro meat. No one has ever tried to defend factory farming.
Oh, in vitro meat. Yeah, we want to talk about that. Okay, so what about locavore? Because that it's so nicely packaged, right? This humane myth and the idea that we can just eat local and reduce greenhouse gas emissions and all of that. There's a lot of myth involved with that, though, isn't there?
Yeah, there are no peer-reviewed studies that support these claims. And it's fairly obvious if you read the text. Words like climate change don't even appear in the Omnivore's Dilemma. Joel Salatin is actually an outspoken climate change denier. I had a public debate with him at the University of Vermont a few years back, and I presented all the studies that point out that there is no scientific validity for the environmental claims around either locavorism or humane meat. And he didn't disagree with any of these. He just said, well, I don't believe in climate change. And that's sort of been kept, I think, the DL people haven't realized this and sort of this ambiguity about talking about nature or a desire to want to have these products. But it's interesting to see people who would fault others for not believing science in other categories, who then suddenly will agree to this when it comes to animals. What I tell people all the time, climate change is not a belief system. It's not like I say, well, I believe in climate change, that's going to help. That's not going to help anything. If you say, I believe in climate change, then you need to do what the peer-reviewed research says we need to do. And that answer is crystal clear. And as we have to radically, in a short period of time, decrease all forms of animal agriculture. And there is no peer-reviewed research that says locavorism has helped. And there's plenty of peer-reviewed research that says it will actually, in terms of biodiversity loss and in terms of GHG greenhouse gas emissions, make the problem worse.
Can you explain what it is about it that makes those things worse?
Absolutely. So the first one, and it seems counterintuitive. Many vegans even are like, well, if people eat humane meat or they eat local, that's not good enough for their fellow travelers or they're making a step on the right path. But that is incorrect. It actually, in terms of climate, makes it worse, and in terms of biodiversity, makes it worse. And there's a few reasons. The first one, what we earlier talked about, when they create these free range, it takes up more space. So if you take from a confined situation and then you just put it out on pasture, if it's more space, well, how do you get that space? You cut down trees. Those trees all have a carbon function. Land use change in the UN report, Livestock's Long Shadow, land use change is the #1 way that animal agriculture harms the environment and causes climate change. So creating more land use change, cutting down more trees, converting more pasture, overgrazing more grass, is the #1 way that free range farming leads to more climate problems, not less. The second one, and this is what we earlier mentioned in terms of biodiversity loss, once you put these animals out in a pasture, they have predators that come to eat them. So how do these animal farmers keep these animals safe? They do horrific practices for all of the wild animals to keep those few animals supposedly safe. Joe Salatin talks about hiding and shooting endangered hawks and eagles in order to protect his pasture chickens. It's in his book, Everything I Want to Do is Illegal. That's the title of the book. They have people who've talked about it, that they use open traps to catch the foxes, that they refer to it like napalm, like being at war with these animals. So they do government-sponsored in the United States, the government helps pay for this, government-sponsored, at least in the United States, mass killing of wildlife all around where these animals are, which only accelerates the species loss. And the third way is these animals take longer to get to what is called market weight. So they have to feed longer, they have flatulence longer, they burp longer, and it takes more of this grain that has to be transported. All of those have a life cycle analysis cost on the environment. And so when you add it all up, as multiple, it's not one person, as multiple studies have done, what they have all determined is that the GHG, the greenhouse gas emissions, from moving from intensified livestock, i.e. factory farms, to free range or pasture is great, and quite a bit greater. It's about 20 to 25% worse for chickens, and it's about 50% worse for cows, which are the biggest culprit.
And what about in vitro? You know, people will go to great lengths to eat meat, which I've been vegan for 20 years, and you know, I remember when I thought, oh, I could never give up meat, but we can, and many of us do and are, but for some reason that there's so many innovative ways of trying to reduce cow farts or put these crazy holes in cows that I don't know, and then the whole in vitro meat thing, and I think this conversation is very controversial among vegans, because some see it that for these people who absolutely will not give up their meat, they say, well, at least there's this. But I think you disagree with that analysis. Am I right?
I do disagree. You're correct. I'm a bit of an outlier. I actually get regularly attacked after a talk against in vitro meat by vegans who stand up and tell me that I'm very, very wrong, and that I'm harming the movement, and that I'm harming animals. I had a big public debate with fairly well-known vegans at UC Berkeley on the topic of in vitro meat. So if any of your viewers want to see both sides of the issue, I encourage them not just to listen to me, to watch the debate. It's free and available online, and you can see all of the different conversations. Some of my major reservations about in vitro meat is, one, it's not vegan, so it takes cells from animals. Rather, it's less suffering, doesn't mean it's zero suffering. While the industry claims it is working on a different growth medium, and while some startups have claimed to use a different growth medium, the primary growth medium that is still used and was used in all the research up to now is the blood of unborn cows. So not only is it not vegan, it is grossly not vegan, and it deeply concerns me that people are promoting this without even telling animal rights activists what is being used. It also, the studies suggest, could well be worse again in terms of greenhouse gas emissions than even factory farms, because the process, these huge biogenerators that are like cloning these cells and then to work the meat is so energy intensive that it will actually take more energy than even CAFOs. And most importantly, and this goes to your point, it is that final dream of speciesism, that the problem is thinking animals are machines. Well, these people suggest the solution is to somehow make animals more like machines. That's to give up the whole game. How can we be not speciesist in any other part of our life if what we're daily practicing is, hey, animals are machines. The goal is to make them more like machines.
Right, and that somehow we actually need this, and there's really no evidence.
That is the other problem, is it is a solution without a problem. There are so many fantastic vegan options already. So whether it's in terms of health or taste or convenience, we have fully vegan options that bleed. What is it that they're supplying? Whatever reason it is that more people are not going vegan, it is not because we have a lack of consumerist choices, but somehow the vast amount of majority of the money and the funding seems to be produce ever new consumerist choices. Somehow this will be the one that convinces people. Well, that seems to me very unlikely. Also, the factory farm industry themselves are largely funding a lot of this.
Mhm.
And why are they funding something which supposedly is going to put them out of business? Can you think of any other industry that has tried to put themselves out of business? And when you read their internal documents and files, which I only did because I was trying to figure out these rhetorical strategies, what they say is, hey, this is actually what's going to make us permanently sustainable, like polyester and cotton. We're going to invent something that we can blend with our own product, which will allow us to sell 75% CAFO meat, 25% in vitro meat. You see what I'm saying? In a way that we've never been able to sell before. This will be the world's perfect filler that'll allow us to sell more of our meat forever while being able to market it as healthier, less fat, and cleaner, and these sorts of things. This is their plan. And so as we try to work with the factory farms, we're always losing. These are not the people we need to be working with. These are actually the people we need to be trying to work against.
Yeah, it's interesting that a lot of them, Maple Foods in Canada now is producing a whole line of vegan products. I think they're called Light Life. They're not really all that great. I don't like them, but so it's like they're, capitalism, right? So they're positioning themselves wherever they think that people are. But then not only that, they have bazillion-dollar marketing budgets, right? So they're basically creating the desire. They could easily turn the world vegan quickly, I think, if they really wanted to.
Yeah, I don't fully know why people are not more vegan. I have some thoughts and we can have a longer conversation about it. But there is no doubt that these industries are trying to position themselves for whatever the market will bring. Right now, they have created for children a blend of some kind of like vegan substitutes blended with meat to make chicken nuggets that they claim are healthier and have cauliflower as a way to get kids to eat their veggies. So that's not the future I'm fighting for. As we said earlier, it is in a way more specious than what we even have now. It's, yes, what people don't seem to understand, veganism isn't a diet, it is an ethical position where we reject speciesism. The diet comes from the ethical position. So anything that gives up the ethical position loses the game. The goal isn't to trick a couple of extra people to eat a few more plant-based meals. The point is to try to convince people to go against their own innate speciesism. That should be our goal.
So for people who've maybe never heard that word before, how do you describe speciesism?
Well, it works, on our side, it works at least in two levels. The first is, look, why is it that someone who thinks that they're a little smarter gets more ethical concern? In no other area would we say that that was true. So even if we are smarter than humans are smarter than some other animal species, which may not even be true, whales and elephants have far larger cranial capacities than we do. Even if it was true, so what? Why would intelligence be a parameter of ethical concern? And I don't think it should be. And if it's not an ethical concern, then regardless of species, everyone deserves certain basic rights. They're not necessarily the same rights. Non-human animals probably don't need the right to vote, but it should be basic rights like the ability to stay with your loved ones, to have consent of your sexual and reproductive choices, to have free range of movement, to be free from unnecessary pain. These sort of basic rights should apply regardless of species.
Okay, yeah, and speaking with animal behaviorist people, they suggest that our idea of intelligence is very different than, like, what we need to be intelligent is very different than what a fish needs to be intelligent in their environment, right? So who are we to judge?
Absolutely. So there's this great short story in a novel, and it's about these terrible experiments that were done on monkeys. And the argument is the monkey is given several boxes and a banana. The wrong question is, why have I been taken from my family? The wrong question is, why do they hate me? The wrong question is, why am I being tortured? The correct question is, how can I use these boxes in order to reach the banana? The only thing we ever reward are actually the lowest level of thought. And it's always done in the most biased towards us type of way. And so the only thing we'll even see as intelligence is things that match what we always do. It's a rigged game out of the beginning. Even within those standards, every single day, we discover new ways that animals use tools, are intelligent, care for each other. One of the things I say to my students is I'll give an experiment, which is a true experiment, and it's been done many, many times, where they'll take one animal and they'll torture it, and they'll take another animal that can see that torture. And if the first animal, say a dog, eats, that's what causes the torture. And if they don't eat, that's what stops the torture. And universally, the animal will, to some degree, starve themselves.
Wow.
And I say, what does this experiment teach us? And the students say a variety of different things. And I say, well, what it teaches me is that humans are less ethical than dogs. Because when a dog sees another dog tortured, they will starve themselves, and we are the ones doing the experiment.
We are, and there's no reason to continue doing what we're doing. And I sometimes I think if people only knew, if people only knew, they'd make the change. But people don't want to know, for one thing, and for good reason. Like you say, it's not a happy place to be. That's why we suffer what's now known as dystopia. And this philosophical shift that you speak about is real. And I think the two groups of people that challenge me the most are environmentalists who aren't vegan or even vegetarian sometimes, and will have incredible amounts of knowledge and research about climate change, and we'll talk endlessly about how we're doing ourselves in, but have failed to, for whatever reason, can't grasp that. And then the other group are the vegetarians who are just happy where they are. I'm happy where I am. I don't want to know that other piece. And they don't understand this philosophical shift. You don't understand really until you get there, right? So that's kind of two different areas of discussion, if you'd like to talk about either of those.
So this goes to a bit of my own thought of why it is that more people aren't becoming vegan. And there's some peer-reviewed research on it. It's preliminary, but suggestive. At least part of it is fear of social stigma. So while I was in graduate school, I knew an environmentalist who, because of environmentalism, had stopped eating meat except for 1 day a year. And I was like, why? And I even looked it up. It almost certainly would make him sick. So the body slowly loses its ability to digest meat if you only eat it 1 day a year. So it can't be for pleasure. There's no nutritional value. And I think it's so that he could tell people he wasn't a vegetarian or he wasn't a vegan. He was the same as everyone else. So many people just want to be the same as everyone else. They don't want to be odd or strange or stand out. They want to break bread together. They want to be, I'm the same as you. And I think a similar thing happens with vegetarians. When I was a vegetarian, this is wrong, but true, I used to bond with meat eaters by saying, well, at least I'm not a vegan. I'm not one of those weirdos. Right. Well, why did I feel the need to do that? And so there is definitely some degree. And actually, one of the things that I found out, so you may have heard these headlines and these articles that say, oh, there's only 2% of people are vegetarian or vegan. Well, first of all of that is untrue. I did a lengthy blog post that your readers can take a look at, where I read through all of the studies and found out that the number is closer to 10%, and it's increasing among people under the age of 50. It's 12%. And so a large number of people actually are vegan and vegetarian. But additionally, what I found out is that there is a large chunk of closet vegans or vegetarians. So there are people who actually avoid meat and dairy all the time, but don't tell people. They stay away from the title because they're worried about social stigma. They're worried about people thinking they're weird or odd or judgmental. And yeah.
Interesting. And I think you're right. I think when I look back at my vegetarian years, I think I was playing both sides of it. I could be friend with the meat eaters because I was, still eating some eggs. But I
Right.
could also sort of say, oh, well, I'm leaning over with the vegans as well, right? So.
Well, we constantly have to do this. I was discussing this with my partner the other day, this kind of weird gaslighting where we have to explain to everyone else that what they're doing is perfectly fine. Like, oh, no, don't worry. That doesn't bother me. I don't care. And that's the social pressure. We're never allowed to say what you're doing is truly horrific and deeply concerns me. And they'll even ask in a way which is silly, like, oh, you don't mind if I eat this in front of you, when all I do is veganism. There's nothing else I write about. There's nothing else I study. So of course you already know the answer to this question. So why are you asking it to force me into this situation where I exonerate you? Oh no, that's fine. So we constantly are gaslit, and we're constantly gaslighting ourselves to try to, and it's double work. Not only do we have to do with the constant trauma of knowing the truth of what's going around, we then have to tell everyone else, theoretically, because of etiquette, that what they're doing is somehow perfectly fine, even though obviously that is not what we believe.
Right. Yeah. And when we try to explain to them, when we finally take that stand and try to explain that, no, actually, it's not okay anymore, it's very disappointing.
Then we're judgmental. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And I tried to be that nice vegan for a long time, but COVID has really shifted something for me personally. I didn't really realize the connection between all these SARS and MERS and HIV. I didn't really make that connection that it's all because of animal exploitation, really, and exploitation of the environment. And so there was COVID, and now there's mutations, and I literally feel like tearing my hair out, because at what point, we've got the sixth great extinction going on. Many of us know about that. Certainly environmentalists are aware of that. And now we've got COVID and the mutations. Like, what's it going to take?
That is the question. How bad do things have to get? I mean, we act like an addict. I mean, climate change isn't some theoretical ideal that's going to happen a few years from now. We're living through it. The forests are on fire. You remember before COVID, and somehow we've all forgot because of COVID, Australia was like being engulfed. California was engulfed in these fires. How bad does it have to get? And no matter how bad it gets, somehow we're just like, let's keep going. Maybe we'll invent in vitro meat and that will solve the problem. And it's like, what would it take to make people realize what's going on and change the behavior? And I really wonder about that.
Well, we keep doing what we're doing and trying to raise awareness of all the many different ways that animal speciesism and animal consumption, or however you want to frame it, carnism, is not a way forward for our species and every other species on the planet. So let's talk about your article about white power milk and dietary racism and the alt-right. Who would ever imagine that dairy is connected so intricately with racism?
Yeah, well, so you probably heard of it. There's this myth that Hitler is vegetarian, and they will say this all the time. You're vegan. Oh, Hitler was vegetarian. Well, right. He wasn't vegetarian. He enjoyed pork. We have recipes from his head cook. He also wasn't vegetarian or vegan because it is an ethical social justice stance, and you can't kill millions of people and be a vegan. But it did kind of interest me in this realization that actually the history is more the opposite. So the alt-right has taken studies about lactose intolerance, claimed that they primarily apply to African Americans, and have therefore claimed from these studies on lactose intolerance that they claim the superiority of the white race is based on the supposed ability of white folks to digest lactose. And so it has provided them a sort of pseudo-intellectual justification for their racial solidarity. And so they will post about this, they will chug milk visually. And also there's something going on with like the whiteness of the milk and their own whiteness. So if you've ever seen Inglourious Bastards, there's the scene where the Nazi is drinking this white milk at the beginning. And so that scene's supposed to show in the show his own commitment to white superiority in the beautiful white milk. Likewise in Get Out, the last scene where she is revealing, the girlfriend is revealing that she's part of white supremacy. She drinks this glass of white milk to show this whiteness. So part of it's this discredited science that they're seizing upon, and part of it is this visual iconic image of this white milk and their whiteness. You know, it makes the bones strong, that they claim makes them have smarter brains and be more physically strong or what have you. And the weird thing is they seem to really believe this. It's a bit of a joke, but they post articles about it. They share links to other articles. And so they're actually reading through this kind of science on lactose intolerance to find a kind of pseudo-intellectual justification.
And there are plant-based vegan doctors in the US who are saying that the dietary guidelines of the US that say that you need milk and dairy are then racist by extension.
Right, so we talked about environmental racism. I think we also have to talk about nutritional racism. And so one of the things I trace in this article is this somewhat lesser known history of colonialism, where while the white colonizing countries would colonize India and would colonize, say, Mexico, part of their justification was like, hey, the reason we're able to beat all of these people is because their diet is so nutritionally poor. And the reason we are so strong, these white colonizers said, is because we eat so much meat. And so their term, which I will use even though I don't like it, but their term was effeminate rice eater. And so they would claim that people in India and Asian people and people in Latin America were effeminate corn or rice eaters. And so their diet is what made them weak, and their diet of meat is what made them strong. Gandhi talks about this autobiography, where he actually tries meat briefly because of his nationalism of India and his belief in this idea. And so this idea, even though we don't fully know it, it never totally went away. And so when you see people like, rah, rah, make America great again, and then they fetishize eating meat, there's a little bit of this memory still going on of like, meat makes us strong, meat makes us masculine, meat makes us patriotic. These very old ideas, and they're very colonialistic ideas, and they're very racist ideas, and they're very sexist ideas.
Yeah, and the hunting too. There was some report, I don't know if it's true or not, that what's her name, Mrs. Trump was carrying an alligator skin purse yesterday as they left the White House. I don't know if that's true or not, but there are images of these guys with their wild game hunting.
And we really have to think about this. Like, why do people still hunt? It can't be for food. Even if you love meat, it can't be for meat. You can get meat much cheaper, much easier, much closer. They say it's for pleasure. Where does the pleasure come from? It can't just be from being outside. You could go for a walk. You could go for a trip. You could go for a photo safari. Why do they, and it costs quite a lot, particularly if you're doing a safari. Why is it pleasurable for them to go and kill an animal? It's really quite an interesting question. What is the reason?
Yeah. And it seems to be a lot of alt-right folks who do that. Am I
or
right?
certainly conservative, Trump Jr. It makes a big deal about his hunting. That's part of the way he bonds, even though they're of different socioeconomic classes, that he loves to hunt, like his followers like to hunt. They tend to be a very conservative group, yes.
Right. Okay, and then about sexism. So you know, you're very brave. I always think it's brave when men call out feminists who aren't vegan. But it's true. Like I don't think you can truly be an environmentalist unless you're vegan, and I don't think you can truly be a feminist unless you're vegan. Would you agree with that?
Well, I don't know if I'll make you happy with my answer. I would not say that they are not feminist. If someone spent their life trying to fight against sex trafficking, they're volunteering in a woman's shelter of domestic violence, they're feminist. They may be incomplete in their feminist. They may have not fully understand the ethical ramifications of what they believe in, but they are feminist. And as a communications professor, I can't imagine a fruitful conversation when I said, hey, you are not a feminist, you need to go vegan. I'm pretty sure that conversation will get nowhere fast. So I think the better approach is to say, you are a feminist, but what you understand is your own identity and ethics you already believe in should include your diet and should include this social justice issue, which is itself a feminist issue. What I would also say is a lot of people in the movement will say, hey, you can't be a feminist and eat meat. And what they won't also reflect on is you can't be a vegan and not be a feminist. And our own movement has some pretty horrific things around very valid issues of sexual harassment, sexual abuse, exploitation of young women. And so if we want to have a true intersectional movement, which is what I believe in, then we need to explain to feminists who eat meat how that is not a true fulfillment of what they already believe in. And that structuring rhetoric teaches us is the best way to convince someone, not that you need to change who you are, but that you need to actualize who you are. And we need to reflect on the ways that our movement is propping up sexism, propping up white supremacy, propping up colonialism. I mean, there's some ads from PETA, and they've gotten much better, but there are some truly horrific ads that we are responsible as well. And we can't wholly put it on other people to say, why aren't you joining with us when we are still doing things like that?
Yeah, I have to say, I think I would have become an activist sooner but when I first became vegan, PETA was kind of the group, and I just was really not attracted to that kind of activism. I did not feel that portrayed my values as a feminist. So I'm very grateful that there are so many more forms of activism now. There's really a place for everybody to get involved. And I wonder, yeah, go ahead.
I just want to underscore one additional point, though, which does matter and which I try to bring up all the time and which is under discussed, which is all forms of animal agriculture, all of it, whether it's CAFO, whether it's free range, whether it's rotational grazing, all of it involves sexual violence. And so that is the message I would say to someone who is a feminist that is still eating meat. And it involves sexual violence at least two levels. They breed the animals have no consent in who they breed with and when they breed with. And some of the memoirs, actually, the farmers themselves will talk about how the animals hate it, they flee, they have to be held down, they have to be forced to do it. It ignores any of their possible different sexualities. I mean, there's no way that humans could possibly be the only folk that have queerness, and that doesn't seem to matter in any of this type of breeding. And the farmers themselves will manhandle their genitalia in order to try to get them to inseminate. And the industry term, not my term, the industry term for this forced simulation of the animals is rape rap. That's what they call it. So as good social justice people who care about issues of consent, that care about LGBT plus rights, we should extend that to the non-human world. So that is what I would say to someone who says, I'm a feminist, why should I care about animals?
Right. Yeah, Joey Carbstrong from Australia did a great documentary called Violated, I think it's called. Have you seen that one? Oh, it's really revealing that he looks at all different species and how they're forcefully reproduced, all the way to bees and shrimp. And yeah, it's quite frightening. I wonder, something I think about is, now there are people who were born vegan in our world now, and they're adults. And I wonder if maybe, because I agree with you that part of being vegan is absolute nonviolence, right? Ahimsa is absolute nonviolence towards everybody, everything, everywhere. And so as people are born with that, I think the people who are perpetuating that violence and that sexism were indoctrinated into the patriarchy. But do you think that that's going to shift now that people are actually being born vegan, that they're going to grow with these values and carry them all through their lives?
I mean, we can always hope, and some of the data suggests that more young people are going vegetarian and vegan than ever before. At the same time, I think it matters a lot how veganism is understood. So if it is understood as a new consumerist choice of I buy plant-based food and not as a value system, then that's what we'll get. And if it's understood as a value system, then that may be what we get. So I think as animal rights activists, as vegan activists, we should be clear that this is a social justice movement we believe in and we're fighting for, and that our allies should not be the factory farm industry who are actually funding. We just talked about funding these other consumerist options. That is not what is going to end the factory farm system. Our allies should be the other social justice movements that we should work with together on highlight these connections on race, on colonialism, on gender, and on the environment.
Well, that sounds like a great place to end. This has been really interesting, and I thank you so much for taking the time today. Do you have anything that else that you want to say that we haven't covered as we go?
I do actually, and this is something that puts me a little bit of an outlier, but I'm trying to get it out there. We don't have a lot of time. We need big changes and we need them fast. We are passing tipping points we can never get past. There are no social justice movements that I know of that have not had some type of legislative or policy goal. We need to be advocating not just for converting individual people to become vegan, we also need to be advocating for at least some type of legislative and positive policy goal. So for example, Nation Rising in Canada is fighting to make it so that all the extra funding the factory farm industry gets from the government goes away. That could be a great example. I am flexible on what that goal needs to be, but we should be fighting for legislative and policy goals as well as all of the other social justice work that we need to do.
All right, there's lots of ways to get involved. And thank you. Are you teaching a course right now then on animal studies?
Not this semester. The only way I could teach the course on race that I wanted to do was to temporarily give up the one on animals, but I'll be teaching one again next year.
Well, lucky students they are if they can sign up for that. Thank you again so much. Appreciate this.
Thank you.